Okay, we want to assess how ranked choice voting and star voting each do with the spoiler problem and with helping third-party and independent candidates. But first, I think I need to recap how these two voting methods work. I'm just going to do it very briefly. If you need more detail, you can look for it elsewhere. So the obvious difference is that in ranked choice voting, you rank the candidates. This candidate is my first choice, this candidate is my second choice, and so on. Whereas in star voting, you give scores to the candidates on a scale from 0 to 5. You give 5 to candidates that you would most prefer to see win, and 0 to candidates that you'd least prefer to win, and can give scores in between 0 and 5 to the other candidates relative to your top and bottom choices. But the big difference really is in the counting process. In ranked choice voting, it's important that only the top rankings on each ballot count in each round of counting. That is, in the first round of counting, you count only the first choice votes. If a candidate gets the most of those votes, that is more than half, they win. But if no candidate gets a majority of votes, then the candidate with the fewest first choice votes is eliminated, and each of the ballots that had that candidate as their top choice now goes to the next candidate down on that ballot. Again, you have another round of counting, only of the candidates who are at the top of each ballot, discounting the eliminated candidate. And if somebody gets a majority, they win. If no one gets a majority, there's another round. So in each round of counting, until there's a majority winner, only the top choice on each ballot counts, and the rest of the choices don't count. In star voting, it's very different. In the first round of counting, all the scores count. That is, for each candidate, their scores on all the ballots are added together, and the two candidates who get the highest cumulative scores go to the automatic runoff against each other. And here, the scores only indicate which candidate you prefer over the other. So it's a majority vote in the second round. But the important thing here is that in the first round, all the scores count. All right, so the typical spoiler election that we're familiar with is one in which you have two major party candidates in a very close election. Neither of them gets a majority of the votes, but one of them wins. That's because you only need the most votes in our current system of voting to win. But there is another candidate from a third party maybe who doesn't have a chance to win but got enough votes that if those votes had gone to one of the major party candidates, the losing major party candidate in particular, the outcome would have been different. That's something that I think we're all familiar with, and it's bad for a number of reasons. For one thing, you can have people win with less than a majority. Number two, it suppresses the interest in and the votes for third-party and independent candidates. Number three, it induces people to vote for candidates they really don't like that much. It's the lesser evil problem. You can vote for a candidate you like who has little chance of winning, or you can vote for a major party candidate in hopes that the one you slightly prefer over the other is going to win. So a lot of problems with spoiler elections. We're all familiar with it. The good news is they'll both ranked choice voting and star voting get rid of the spoiler problem. Now, there are cases that are similar to the familiar spoiler scenario where star voting advocates argue that this could also be called a spoiler election. I don't want to get hung up on the semantics of it, but the important thing is that it's similar to the familiar case in that if you vote for your true first choice in ranked choice voting, you could end up getting your worst possible outcome, whereas if you had given your second choice top ranking, you would have gotten that second choice as the outcome. This is due to the way that the rankings count. The second preferences, third preferences don't count. Only the top preferences count, and that's what causes this kind of outcome. In star voting, this possibility is all but eliminated. That is, in some kind of extreme hypothetical case, it might happen, but it's unlikely to happen. That means that for ranked choice voting, this possibility is real. In fact, it has happened. You may have heard of the Burlington mayoral election of 2009, in which there was this type of problem that cropped up. Opponents of ranked choice voting often bring this up. It can happen. It does happen. It happened here, and it probably could happen in the future more often the more we institute ranked choice voting. I don't put a lot of weight on this particular consideration because I consider other things as more important, but some people do. The one thing we have to say, though, is that we don't really know how often this will happen. People have different opinions on that, but it is important that we do know it will happen, just not how often. How then does this affect third-party and independent candidates? Well, if you get rid of spoiler elections, you're obviously going to increase opportunities for third-party candidates and independents to get voter attention and to do better. And I think both under ranked choice voting and star voting, they will do better. They'll start to win elections. They'll certainly get more voter attention. They could, especially down ballot, they could win city elections, county elections, maybe in state legislative seats. But I don't think you're going to do away with the two-party system like this without further changes. And that's for a few reasons, but I'll mention three in particular. One is that the major parties, even if you change the voting system, they still have a lot of institutional advantages. For example, they have access to big money. They have organizations in all 50 states with volunteers who are experienced in helping campaigns. And they have voter familiarity. So they have a lot of institutional advantage that they'll maintain even though you change the voting system. And that means if they keep winning, third parties are going to have trouble making the case that they are competitive. There's also the problem that major parties, anytime you have a single winner election, a bigger coalition party is going to do better than a principal party, which most third parties are. Major parties tend to form big coalitions around vague principles, broad notions of good things, and blow with the wind in terms of issues where voters are at, whereas third parties try to stick to particular sets of principles, like the Libertarian Party or the Green Party. They try to adhere to their principles. That means it's going to be hard for them to build as big a coalition as a major party. And in any single winner election, the bigger the coalition, the more your chance of winning. Sometimes people say, well, you got an awful lot of people who are disillusioned with the two major parties, so we'll probably have a new party emerge. The problem is not all those voters, those independent or non-affiliated voters, are the people who would like to leave the major parties. Not all of them would be attracted to the same party. They'd probably be scattered among several parties, which would make it difficult for any one of them to emerge as a serious competitor. There is the possibility, though, especially with our two parties splitting apart at the seams lately, that a new party could emerge and displace one of the two major parties. I think that's possible, not real likely, without further changes. The kind of changes I'm thinking of is, number one, get rid of the Electoral College. Number two, you could, like Andrew Yang is proposing, have open primaries where all the candidates from all the parties run together in one election. But given that if you're just talking about changing to ranked choice voting or star voting, I don't think it's going to change the two-party system, although third-party candidates and all independents, maybe even independents more so than third parties, will do better. I think they'll do a little better in star voting than in ranked choice voting, simply because all those secondary scores can add to a third-party candidate's vote total, making it more possible for them to get in the runoff and thus more possible for them to win. So I think it'll do a little better on that score as well. Let's move on to consider some other things.